They used to laugh at me, a simple man just trying to get by, while they sipped champagne in their fancy mansions, thinking they were better than me. My name's Marcus Bell, and back then, I was the guy scrubbing their polished marble floors while they turned up their noses at me. I still remember one old white guy with silver hair who went out of his way to make sure I felt small, like I didn't belong anywhere near their so-called perfect world. They had no clue that the man they mocked would end up standing way above them all, not just in money, but in what really counts, dignity. The alarm clock screamed at me at exactly 5:15 in the morning, pulling me out of a restless sleep in my cramped studio apartment down in East Harlem. Thin rays of early light slipped through the worn-out curtains, and my old mutt, Chester, lifted his head and gave a lazy stretch by my feet. At 30 years old, my mornings ran like clockwork. 10 minutes to hit the shower, another 10 to throw on my work clothes, 5 to gulp down some burnt coffee, and 22 minutes sharp to catch the early subway to Brooklyn for my first janitorial shift at a high-rise office tower. Just another grind, just another dollar, I muttered, patting Chester's head before heading out the door. Tacked up on my fridge with a magnet was my battle plan for the week. Monday through Wednesday cleaning offices downtown, Thursday afternoon spent dusting penthouses in Park Slope, and Fridays scrubbing up weekend houses out in Montauk, where the rich folks like to play pretend. There was a framed degree gathering dust on my cracked wall, a bachelor's in physical therapy from Howard University. A reminder of the life I thought I was building once, before everything flipped upside down. I used to have a good job at a rehab center, helping folks get back on their feet after surgeries or accidents. But when my daddy got diagnosed with Parkinson's, everything changed. I walked away from my career without blinking, spent every dime I had taking care of him, because that's what a man does for family. 3 years later, when he passed, all I had left were hospital debts and memories. You did right by him, Marcus, I told my reflection as I buttoned up my faded work shirt, trying to smooth down the wrinkles. Maybe I wasn't doing the kind of work that earned applause anymore, but my father's voice still echoed in my head. It's not what you do for a paycheck that defines you, it's what you carry in your heart. Those words stayed with me, kept me standing tall even when folks tried to grind me down. Medical bills slammed the door shut on my old career, at least for now. Cleaning wasn't the dream, but it was steady, it paid cash, and it gave me the breathing room to piece my life back together one stubborn day at a time. Every morning, I stepped out that door with my head high, even when people looked right through me, like I was invisible. Riding the packed subway downtown, I pulled out my beat-up old phone and checked my schedule. A last-minute job had popped up. Tonight, I was headed to the Carrington estate out in Greenport. Some high-society charity gala, and they needed extra hands to keep the place spotless while the rich folks threw their money around. The pay was time and a half, and I needed every penny after Chester's latest vet bills nearly wiped me out. A message from my boss lit up the screen, and I had to chuckle under my breath. The Carringtons expect perfection. Keep your head down, do the job, and get out. But don't worry, they pay top dollar. By the time the sun started dipping low, I'd already knocked out 2 regular cleaning gigs. When I rolled up to the Carrington mansion, the place looked like something straight out of a magazine. Sprawling lawns, hedges trimmed so clean you could cut yourself on M, and a colonial-style house gleaming under layers of marble and gold like it was no big deal. The cleaning supervisor met me at the side entrance and handed me a bucket and mop like they were handing out weapons for a battle. "You'll be working the bathrooms and the floors," she said, not bothering to look me in the eye. "Stay out of sight. Folks like these don't want to be reminded about the hands that scrub their floors clean." I nodded, slipping on a pair of yellow gloves that might as well have been part of my skin by now. As I gathered my supplies, I let my eyes drift over the ridiculous wealth spread out in every corner, fresh orchids that probably cost more than a month's rent, and paintings that could wipe out my entire student loan debt with one sale. I didn't waste my energy being bitter anymore. Life had taught me that carrying hate would only slow you down. But sometimes it got to me, how easy it all seemed for them, floating through rooms like these without a second thought, like luxury was the air they breathed. "Focus, Marcus," I muttered to myself, tightening my grip on the mop. "Get in, get out. One night, that's it." I had no way of knowing this night would be the line in the sand, the last night I'd ever spend invisible to people who thought money gave him the right to look down on others. The gala was in full swing when a supervisor waved me over, barking orders to clean up some spilled champagne in the main hall. The giant crystal chandeliers lit up the room, so bright it was like standing inside a diamond. Women floated by in gowns that sparkled under the lights, and men laughed in tuxedos that probably cost more than my car. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, head down, black uniform blending into the background. Nobody saw me until I knelt down near the marble fireplace, blotting up a puddle of pink champagne. Then it happened. A voice cut through the music in laughter, loud enough for everyone to hear. Well, what do we have here? The words dripped with mockery. I gritted my teeth and kept scrubbing, praying the moment would just pass. But it didn't. Gerald Carrington himself, the gray-haired king of this golden castle, strutted over in his shiny blue suit, holding a whiskey glass like it was a royal scepter. At 68, he'd spent a lifetime hiding cruelty behind fake charm. "Look at this, folks," he called out, pointing at me like I was some circus act. "Isn't it something? Watching them work, so natural in their habitat." A circle formed around me, men in custom tuxes, women draped in jewelry heavier than my old mortgage, all laughing, whispering behind their glasses of imported champagne. I wasn't here to put on a show. I wasn't here to entertain them. "I understand, sir," I said, keeping my voice even, keeping my head down. One woman, dripping in cream silk and diamonds, tilted her head at me like I was something she might find stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "I always wonder," she mused loudly, "do they ever dream of being like us?" Gerald smirked and leaned in closer, voice full of fake curiosity. "Tell us, boy, what's your name?" "Marcus, sir," I said, standing up a little straighter. "Marcus," he repeated slowly, like he was tasting something foreign. "Tell me, Marcus, what fills your dreams at night while you're down there scrubbing our floors? Dreaming of catching yourself a rich wife, maybe?" I lifted my head then, locking eyes with him. I made sure he saw the steady fire burning behind mine. "I think about doing a good job, sir," I said, voice steady, and getting home to my dog. The ring of laughter exploded around me, bouncing off the marble and the gold. Gerald chuckled, flashing a wolfish grin. "Predictable," he said, raising his glass in mock salute. "A simple life for a simple man. That's how I used to think about it. Anyway." I slid my bucket across the floor to the next section, keeping my head down, even though my face burned with shame. Outwardly, I stayed calm, just like I'd trained myself to do. In 3 years of cleaning up after the wealthy, I learned one thing better than anything else: staying invisible was my best armor. What I didn't know that night, while I kept mopping like nothing had happened, was that my days of being invisible were running out fast. The same folks laughing at me would soon be looking at me in a whole different light, and not from a place of pity either. The next 3 years rolled by the way seasons change, quiet, steady, one day bleeding into the next without much to mark the difference. I stuck to my routines, kept my head low, kept moving forward. But the memory of that night at the Carrington mansion didn't disappear. It left a mark, even if no one else could see it. The very next morning after Carrington humiliated me, I walked away from every cleaning job I had out in Greenport. I tightened my focus on my Manhattan clients, office towers, and empty penthouses, places where nobody sneered at me, because nobody was around to notice me at all. Every now and then, usually when the city was unusually quiet and the streets felt too wide, I'd hear Gerald Carrington's voice laughing again in my head. Not sharp anymore, but dull and lingering, like the kind of ache you feel in an old injury right before a storm rolls in. "You were too good for those rich clowns anyway," my friend Curtis said once, during one of our monthly coffee breaks down at a diner on 125th Street. Curtis had been there that night too, working the back kitchens. Over time, he became one of the few people I trusted. I gave him a weak smile and said, "I don't even think about them anymore." But that was a lie. Sometimes I wondered what ghost haunted them, what hollowness inside needed to crush others just to feel full for a minute. It didn't excuse anything, but it made them seem smaller, not larger. My tiny apartment stayed my safe place through it all. I managed to make a few small upgrades over the years: a set of second-hand curtains, a used love seat I snagged at a yard sale, and a growing pile of old physical therapy textbooks I kept in the corner, telling myself maybe, just maybe, I'd get back into my real profession someday. Curtis caught me staring out the window during one of our talks. "You still think about going back to it, huh?" "Sometimes," I admitted with a shrug. "But getting recertified ain't cheap." Later that same evening, I trudged up the 5 flights of stairs, arms loaded with groceries, boots scuffing against the worn-down steps. When I got to my door, I saw it, a bright notice taped right across the peeling paint. The building had been sold. New owners. In 3 months, the rent was going up by 40%. "Of course," I muttered, stepping carefully over Chester's tail as he came to greet me. My budget was already hanging on by a thread. This wasn't a pothole I could step over. It was a whole damn mountain that had popped up right in my path. Over the next few weeks, I busted my back picking up every extra shift I could find and putting in applications for better-paying gigs. But no matter how hard I pushed, the math just didn't add up. The new rent was a joke, a cruel one, and unless I wanted to move way out past the city line, where the buses ran once an hour and the commute would chew through my nights, it wasn't going to happen. I stood there one evening at my rickety kitchen table, gripping a calculator like it might change the numbers if I squeezed hard enough. A heavy feeling settled in my chest. I'd already survived worse. My daddy's long illness, the fallout afterward, rebuilding my life brick by brick. I wasn't about to let this beat me. "We're gonna be okay, Chester," I said, reaching down to rub behind his graying ears. Change ain't always bad. Sometimes it's just life giving you a push. I didn't realize how true those words were, or how close I was to a change that would flip my whole world upside down. At exactly 7:13 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, I heard 3 sharp knocks at my door, loud, firm, and serious enough to make Chester dive under the couch. That dog wasn't scared of much, so it set my nerves on edge right away. Peeking through the peephole, I saw a tall white man, probably in his mid-60s, wearing a suit so well-made you could tell he wasn't new money. No flashy gold chains, no oversized watches. This was old wealth, the kind that didn't need to brag. When I cracked the door with the chain still on, he gave me a polite nod. "Mr. Marcus Bell?" he asked. "That's me," I said cautiously. "I'm William Prescott, from the firm of Prescott, Langston, and Reed." He slipped a heavy business card through the gap, thick stock, raised lettering, no corners cut. "I need to discuss a pressing legal matter involving your great-uncle, Elijah Booker." I stared at the card like it might bite me. "You got the wrong guy," I said. "I don't have any great-uncle named Elijah." But Prescott didn't even blink. "If you'll allow me inside, I can explain." "I assure you, Mr. Bell, this is no mistake." Something in his face, a weight behind his words, made me hesitate. Against every instinct screaming at me to slam the door, I slid off the chain and let him step inside. We sat at my wobbly little dining table, grocery bags still sitting on the floor beside us. Prescott set a leather briefcase down and started pulling out folders. "Mr. Bell," he began, adjusting his silver-framed glasses, "did you know your grandmother, Ruth, had an older brother?" "Grandma Ruth," I said, feeling like I was falling behind in the conversation. "She passed before I was even born." My mama barely talked about her side of the family. "No surprise there," Prescott said gently. "There were complications." He opened a folder and pushed a document toward me. "Your great-uncle Elijah Booker left the United States in 1961 after a bitter family dispute. He resettled in Zurich, invested heavily in emerging tech industries, and over the next 60 years, built a multinational corporation called Booker Enterprises." I stared at the paperwork, feeling more lost by the second. None of this made any sense. Turned out, Booker Enterprises wasn't just some fly-by-night operation. They made microprocessors, high-end security systems, medical imaging equipment, and a bunch of other cutting-edge tech that flew way over my head. "Yes," Prescott nodded when he saw the look on my face. "Your great-uncle passed away 3 months ago at the age of 97. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said automatically, even though my mind was still trying to catch up. "But I don't get it. Why are you here?" Prescott reached into his briefcase again, pulling out a thick file. Mr. Booker never married and never had children. Despite the bad blood that drove him overseas, he kept a distant eye on his sister's bloodline. After his passing, his will set off a pretty complicated legal process. He slid a sheet of paper across the table toward me. "After extensive verification," he said, steepling his fingers, "we've confirmed that you, Marcus Bell, are the sole surviving descendant of Ruth Booker, Elijah's sister." I stared down at the words on the page, but they may as well have been written in another language. Legal jargon floated across my vision like smoke. "Mr. Bell," Prescott said, his voice softening, "Elijah Booker left behind an estate valued at roughly $4.7 billion. And you are his sole heir." The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. "That's impossible," I croaked. "I assure you, it's very real," he said. Prescott pulled out more paperwork, explaining that his firm had spent months triple-checking everything, freezing assets quietly to avoid setting off a financial earthquake before reaching out to me. I couldn't sit still. I pushed back from the table and started pacing the tiny room, heart hammering against my ribs. This had to be a scam. Or worse, some cruel setup. Gerald Carrington's laughter from that gala years ago rang in my head like a nasty ghost I couldn't shake. "Who put you up to this?" I snapped. Prescott stayed calm as a statue. "Mr. Bell, I have been the Booker family's attorney for 35 years. I understand your doubts, but tomorrow at exactly this time, the first installment, $50 million, will be wired into a secured account in your name. He reached into his briefcase again and set down a small black card on the table. This temporary card is linked to a $500,000 advance for any immediate needs while we finalize the full transfer. I stared at the card like it might catch fire. Why me? Why now? Prescott must have seen the storm brewing in my face because he added gently, "Your great-uncle made it clear he wanted his heir to prove they could stand tall without money before inheriting it." That character came first. Outside, night fell over Harlem, the city humming below my window. I sat there, just a broke janitor with a battered soul, staring at the man who claimed I was now one of the richest black men in America. Somewhere way out there, in a universe bigger than anything I could imagine, it felt like destiny had finally decided it was my turn to rise. 3 months later, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse overlooking Central Park, the city spread out beneath me like a blanket of stars. Chester snoozed contentedly on a leather sofa, no clue how much our lives had turned inside out. The outside world had changed fast. Wealth managers, real estate agents, personal assistants, stylists, they all stormed in like a hurricane. But inside? Inside I was changing slower. Careful. Like an old oak tree feeling out which way the sun was shining before daring to grow. The Booker Foundation board meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m., my assistant, Jasmine, reminded me, glancing up from her tablet. The foundation had become everything to me once I realized just how deep my great-uncle's fortune ran. It was my way to fight healthcare injustice for folks like my daddy, folks like me, who had been forgotten by the system. Jasmine hesitated before adding, "Also, you've been invited to the annual Carrington Gala." I froze, my hand resting against the cold glass, staring out at the city that had once made me invisible. "Is this the same event you were talking about?" I asked, looking at my reflection in the giant window, a reflection that blurred with memories of myself years ago, scrubbing marble floors on my hands and knees in yellow gloves. "Yeah," Jasmine said awkwardly. "The one where they treated you like part of the entertainment." For a second, we both stood there, the weight of the past pressing down between us. "Maybe we should decline," she offered gently. "No," I said, voice low but steady. "Accept the invitation." That evening, while my new stylist laid out options for the gala, I found myself thinking about my great-uncle Elijah, a man I'd never even met, yet whose spirit I was starting to understand. A month after Prescott's visit, a letter had arrived, handwritten in looping script that spoke of a different era. Inside was a message that hit me harder than any dollar figure ever could. Money doesn't change you. It just magnifies who you already are. True character isn't in gaining wealth. It's in carrying it with dignity. I made a quiet vow that night. I wasn't going to just be another rich man chasing more riches. I was going to carry it right. Anonymous donations started popping up where they mattered. My old cleaning agency's employees suddenly had healthcare coverage. My former landlord found himself blessed with a fund that repaired the crumbling building so families wouldn't be pushed out by rising rents. I learned that wealth was like water. It could nourish or it could destroy, depending on how you directed it. When it came time to choose a suit for the gala, I didn't go for flash. No loud designer logos, no blinding watches. Just a simple, custom-tailored navy suit, clean and powerful without shouting. I wanted to walk into that room with dignity, not showmanship. Later that night, as I got ready for bed in my new home, a sleek penthouse high above Central Park, I realized something important. This return trip to Greenport wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my own history. About standing as a whole man, not just a billionaire, but a son, a worker, a survivor. The Carrington Gala loomed closer, and this time, I wouldn't be invisible. The Carrington estate glowed under the evening sky, the same picture-perfect grounds I used to mop and polish. Now I watched from the back seat of a town car as my driver pulled into the long, winding driveway. "We're here, Mr. Bell," the driver said, pulling up to the entrance lined with staff standing stiffly in starched uniforms. I smoothed the front of my dark suit and adjusted my cufflinks. No gold chains, no flashing cameras. Just the quiet confidence of a man who no longer needed to prove anything to anybody. The moment my polished shoes hit the marble steps, heads turned. Whispers stirred like a sudden breeze. Not about the janitor they once ignored. About the man they now called Marcus Booker Bell, the heir to a fortune most of them couldn't even dream of. "Mr. Bell, welcome," the event coordinator beamed, checking my name off the list. Mr. Carrington will be thrilled you could join us. Inside, everything was just how I remembered. Chandeliers throwing golden light over imported flowers, the low hum of whispered wealth hanging heavy in the air. But this time, I didn't cling to the shadows. I moved right down the center of the room, a glass of champagne in my hand, meeting every gaze head-on. A familiar voice stopped me, hesitant, almost apologetic. It was Victoria, the same woman in the cream dress who once helped mock me into the ground. She blinked, struggling to paste on her perfect social smile. "It's you," she whispered, rattled. "I heard Marcus Booker Bell was attending, but I never imagined. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" I said, my voice even. "You're not? You don't still?" She fumbled, trailing off. "No," I said simply. Though I learned a lot from those days. Her awkwardness filled the silence, thick and uncomfortable. "I should introduce you to everyone. Charles will be so pleased," she said with forced cheerfulness. I gave her a slow, measured smile. "I'm sure he will." She led me across the ballroom, and I could feel the hungry curiosity of the guests buzzing all around us. Charles Carrington stood by the fireplace, exactly where he always had. Same expensive suit, same smug smile. But when he turned and saw me, that smile froze midair. Recognition hit him first, then confusion, then dread. He tilted his champagne glass dangerously. "You?" he stammered. "We've met before, Mr. Carrington," I said calmly. Though, back then, I was in a different position. His face drained of color, and the room seemed to pause, the music and conversation thinning to a whisper. I don't believe it," Charles muttered, searching for the right mask to wear. He recovered, forcing a brittle smile onto his face. "Remarkable transformation," he said. "It's not a transformation," I corrected softly. "I'm the same man I've always been." The silence grew, and all around us, I could feel eyes burning into the back of my suit. Victoria wrung her hands, desperate to smooth things over. "Charles hosts the grandest charity galas," she blurted. "For a worthy cause," I nodded smoothly. "I did a little research before accepting tonight's invitation. Your foundation's work for children's education is impressive." Charles latched onto that lifeline eagerly. Yes, we all do our part," he said, slipping back into practiced lines. "For those less fortunate." The old condescension was still there, muted but alive. I gave a small smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Actually, that's why I'm here. My foundation is launching an initiative focused on dignity in healthcare. For caregivers and home health workers, folks who do the work that too often gets overlooked." A few murmurs of approval drifted from the crowd. I held Charles's gaze firmly and raised my glass slightly. 3 years ago, I was cleaning floors in places like this while taking care of my father, who battled Parkinson's till the end. Tonight, I stand here with the means to help others who carry that same weight. The room, so full of noise minutes ago, now hung heavy with a powerful silence. For once, Charles Carrington, the man who thought wealth gave him the right to mock and belittle, had no words. As the evening wound down, I slipped out quietly, the crisp night air washing over me like a blessing. Behind me, I could still hear the ripple of my story passing through the crowd, not about the size of my bank account, but about the strength it took to hold onto dignity when you had nothing, and the grace to hold it even when you had everything. Charles Carrington spent the rest of the night avoiding my eyes, his loud laugh strangely muted, the king in his golden castle finally forced to face what he'd once dismissed. As I walked toward my car under a sky full of stars, I realized something deeper than any triumph. Their opinions had never defined my worth. Not when I scrubbed their floors. And not now, when I could buy their estates a dozen times over. The real wealth I carried wasn't measured in bank accounts or skyscrapers. It lived in compassion. It lived in respect. It lived in remembering who I was and who I would always be. Because true dignity isn't bought. It's earned, one hard day, one hard choice, one unbreakable moment at a time. Have you ever been underestimated? Judged by what you looked like instead of who you were? Share your story below, because we all have a journey, and sometimes, the ones the world overlooks are the ones destined to shine the brightest. If this story spoke to you, make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories of strength, dignity, and the unstoppable human spirit.